As the war in Ukraine continues, some say it's time to reconsider the Biden-era relationship with Russia. They say that Trump's Russia policy, a return to friendlier norms, could help end the conflict, reduce nuclear risk, restore diplomacy. But others are warning against that. Cozying up to Putin, they argue, rewards aggression, weakens alliances, emboldens autocrats around the world. Is Trump steering us toward stability with Russia or surrender? Tonight, in partnership with the Council on Foreign Relations Open to Debate, asks whether Trump's Russia policies are a return to normalcy or defeat for America. This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. We are at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. Our partner for this one, a three-part series we are calling The Trump Doctrine, a Global Reckoning. The question we're debating, are Trump's Russia policies a return to normalcy or a defeat for America? But before I introduce our debaters, Michael Froman, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, joins me on stage.
Thank you, John. Really delighted to have you all here tonight for this series of debates. The Council, as you all know, is a nonpartisan institution. It's independent. It's got no ties to any government, including the U.S. government. It does not take institutional positions. The arguments you'll be hearing, including from our fellows, are their opinions alone. And we think that's important, that this be a place where people can come and share their views openly. It's one reason we're so delighted to partner with Open to Debate, because at a time when there are major issues on the agenda, major questions, including the three questions that we'll be addressing today, how it's ever more important that there be civil discourse and a capacity for people to present alternative points of view in a civil way. So we're very grateful to everybody who's agreed to participate in the debate today, grateful to all of our CFR members for being here, and extremely grateful to John and Robert Rosencrantz and others at Open to Debate for being a terrific partner in this effort, and look forward to hearing the Trump doctrine. So back to you, John.
I'd like to welcome our debaters to the stage. First up, arguing return to normalcy, I want to welcome Thomas Graham and his partner, Jeffrey Sachs. And arguing on the other side, defeat for America, I want to welcome Alina Polyakova and her partner joining us remotely, Bill Browder. We're going to go now into our opening statements, and I want to start first with Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia, as well as a renowned economist whose ideas have had a global impact from the 1980s forward. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being here with us. The floor is yours. You are arguing that these policies are a return to normalcy. Here's your chance, please, to tell us why.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We made a bad mistake starting in 1991, and that was to interpret the end of the Cold War as victory for the United States and an opportunity for impunity, basically, as opposed to an end of a war and the opportunity for peace. Essentially, starting in 1991, U.S. foreign policy was based on the idea that we are the sole superpower and we can do what we want. One of the things that we wanted to do, starting already in 1992, formalized in 1994, explained by Zbig Brzezinski in the pages of Foreign Affairs in 1997, and then a formal part of our policy up until the new administration was to expand NATO to Ukraine, to Georgia, and to anywhere else we wanted. The idea was we can do what we want. If Russia or China said, we will establish military bases in the Western Hemisphere, we would freak out. And of course, we did freak out when that happened in 1962. We came within 1 second of nuclear Armageddon, actually, if you know the story of the disabled submarine. The United States cannot think in terms of the other side, typically. And so while Russia expressed the opposition to this policy, the United States kept saying, we don't hear, and we don't care. It's an open door. We go where we want. The U.S. did many other things along the way, breaking Serbia in two, abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty, overthrowing the government of Ukraine in February 2014, many things that require more elaboration. But basically, we pushed and pushed to the point of war. The war needs to end. We came close to nuclear war in November 2022. Ukraine has been destroyed in this process. We should make a sensible observation that our approach was misguided. We can't do everything we want, and we should not aim to put our military on Russia's border. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey Sachs. Again, our question is, are Trump's Russia policies a return to normalcy or a defeat for America? And here to give his opening statement, speaking from Denmark, Bill Browder. Bill is CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, the author of a book called Red Notice, and also the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill, thanks for joining us remotely, and the floor is yours.
Great to see you all. Thank you for this very important invitation to this debate. Let me just start out by saying why am I not physically there? Why am I not with all of you in this room? And the reason is because it's too dangerous for me to come into this room. Why is it too dangerous? Because I have a conflict with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin and I have basically been in a fight over corruption for the last 15 years. I was the largest foreign investor in Russia, and as such, I discovered lots of corruption in Russia. I exposed the corruption, and in retaliation to me exposing the corruption, I was expelled from the country. I was declared a threat to national security. My offices were then raided, documents were seized, and the documents were then used in a complex fraud in which a number of organized criminals and government officials stole $230 million of taxes that my firm paid to the Russian government. My lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, discovered the crime, exposed it, and was subsequently arrested, tortured for 358 days, and killed in Russian police custody. I went on a campaign to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky, and the campaign led to Vladimir Putin basically becoming my adversary. And in doing so, he has been trying to kill me, kidnap me, and arrest me. They've used Interpol a number of times to have me arrested. It used to be that I could come to the United States, and the United States was my strongest ally in a fight against Vladimir Putin. And in recent times, the United States is no longer my strongest ally. In fact, it looks at times as if the United States is aligning itself with Russia. And when I say that, we can look at the votes at the United Nations and various other policies. And in seeing all this, I say to myself, I don't want to come to the United States and be arrested and handed over to Vladimir Putin.
Bill,
And
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off
a-
because you've hit time, but we want to hear more of your argument when we get into the discussion section of the program. I want to now welcome Thomas Graham. Thomas is a distinguished fellow here at the Council on Foreign Relations and author of Getting Russia Right. Thomas, it's great to have you here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to be here. I want to make 4 brief points. First, the U.S.-dominated world order is giving way to a world order of multiple powers. World order of multiple powers is a normal state of affair throughout history. Second point is that Russia is going to remain one of those centers of power because of its nuclear weapons, its rich natural endowment, its geographical location, and also because of its political will. Being a great power is a core element of Russian national identity, and any Russian leader, Putin or his successor, is going to try to assert Russia's prerogatives on the global stage. Third point, this Russia is going to continue to be a rival of the United States, as it has been from the very moment the United States emerged as a global power at the very end of the 19th century. We are 2 expansionary powers, we have different worldviews, and we're going to come into conflict we're going to produce tension all along the periphery between, on Eurasia, along Russia's periphery in Eurasia. The fourth point is that the United States really has no choice but to engage this Russia, as we have for most of the past 150 years. We have tried to isolate Russia diplomatically over the past 3 to 4 years. That has not worked because China, India, and others are not prepared to follow us. We need to understand that engagement is not a reward for good behavior. Engagement, diplomatic contact, is the way that we establish our interest, we convey our red lines to the Russian side, and we understand where they're coming from. All of this in the interest of avoiding a unnecessary conflict between our two sides. Now, the purpose of engagement, and I think the purpose of engagement with the Trump administration, is not to reset this relationship, not to make it a broad partnership. As I said, we're going to be rivals. The real goal of this re-engagement is to transform what is a deeply adversarial relationship fraught with the risk of nuclear war into what I would call competitive coexistence, where we compete across a broad range of issues and cooperate on those issues that are necessary for the survival of the planet.
Thank you. And finally, to give her opening statement, I want to welcome back to Open to Debate Alina Polyakova. Alina is the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis, a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And as I said, a returning debater. It's great to have you back, and the floor is yours. You are arguing that it is a defeat for America, the current policy.
So I'm glad to be back on the stage here. I think as a big opening, we need to level set about what's actually going on. So humor me with a vignette. Let's say you live in a house in a relatively peaceful neighborhood, but next door you have a neighbor who lives in a much bigger house, and he keeps eyeing your land, keeps thinking maybe he wants to buy a plot of your land. Nothing happens for a while, and then suddenly, out of the blue, this neighbor invades your house, breaks in, rapes your wife, steals your children, beats you up, and says, I'm going to live on the first floor of your house now, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you know what? Your neighbor across the street that has even a bigger house who said he was going to protect you, well, you know, that neighbor may not come to your defense, so this is just the way life is going to be. I'm going to harass you, I'm going to beat you, and you know what? You have no weapons to protect yourself, and your friends aren't going to come to your defense either. So that's exactly what's happening with Russia's war against Ukraine, but it's actually worse because Russia signed an agreement in 1994 that in exchange for Ukraine's nuclear weapons, it would respect Ukraine's sovereignty, meaning Russia promised they would not invade Ukraine, and the Ukrainians believe this, and that's why Ukraine is not a nuclear state today. So Russia has broken almost every single international agreement it has ever signed, and it is not a trusted partner. Certainly Russia under Vladimir Putin is not a trusted partner. So I think we have to look at Russia as it actually is today, not a mythical, romanticized version of Russia that we want it to be, which would be a trusted partner to the United States and our allies. Russia under Putin doesn't want lasting peace. Russia is not interested in a ceasefire, and Russia is not interested in an open and sincere negotiation because they are not interested in making any compromises. This is Russia under Vladimir Putin. It is a corrupt state. It is a not trusted actor. It is a country that we cannot have a positive relationship with, even though we've tried 5 times to have a reset with Putin's Russia. And every time it has led to more aggression, to more invasions, and to a worsening in the relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. So that concludes our first round. So we move on to our second round, and our second round is where we have a much more free-flowing conversation among the 4 debaters. They can interact with one another, interrupt one another, but I'm going to lead things off with a question or two. But I just want to say what I'm hearing in the opening statements is that the side arguing for return to normalcy, Thomas Graham and Jeffrey Sachs are arguing that what's really needed when they're talking about normal policy is not some kind of kumbaya relationship, but the recognition that Russia has interests and values and a place in the world, and that there needs to be constructive engagement in order to avoid an unnecessary conflict. The side arguing against is very much focused on the character of Vladimir Putin himself and the way he's leading the country, that Russia is corrupt, it cannot be trusted. The United States has tried many times to establish a more constructive relationship and has not been able to because, they say, of the politics and the character of Vladimir Putin. One thing I think I do want to establish a little bit more is what this side arguing for normalcy means by normalcy. If you go back to immediately after the foundation of the Russian Federation, after the end of the Cold War, it felt normalcy at that point meant quite a warm relationship. The Russians were invited to be at NATO meetings. They took part in NATO meetings. There were treaties, et cetera. Are we talking that kind of normal? Was that normal, or are you talking about the kind of normal that was in effect during the last 20 years of the Soviet Union, when we were reaching agreements on treaties? We were trying to avoid nuclear conflict on both sides, but we were definitely bitter rivals. Is it that kind of normal, or is it something else that you mean when you say a normal relationship? Return to normalcy.
When I'm talking about a return to normalcy, I'm talking about what is a normal relationship between two great powers throughout history that have conflicting geopolitical interests for understandable reasons. It certainly isn't 1991, which was a unique period in global history, with Russia on its knees at that point, not in a position really to defend very effectively its national interest at that point. I think when I argue normalcy, the last 20 years of the Cold War might be closer to that. The first years of the 19th century, or the 20th century.
And in what specific way would you say, are we not that now?
Because we were trying to isolate Russia diplomatically. We had no contact at all. We have refused engagement because of Russia's actions in Ukraine. And I understand that, but the argument I'm making is that you need to be engaged with Russia diplomatically. That doesn't mean partnership. It means conducting a rivalry responsibly to prevent the conflict from spinning out of control and leading to a military conflict that neither side is interested in.
I wanted to have that understood. Bill Browder, having heard that description of normalcy, I want to go to the fact that was mentioned in the openings that in February, the U.S. at the United Nations voted against a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Does that to you seem not normal, not a kind of normalcy, or can you take that on?
I think it's totally absurd that that the United States would side with Russia, North Korea, Iran, and other countries and not condemn the invasion of Ukraine. It's completely outrageous, and it just seems to me that I'm not even sure what we mean by normalcy. If Tom, what you're saying is we should go back to the Cold War, well, we had a policy of containment. We tried to contain the Soviet Union from all of their evil acts. And what we have right now is Vladimir Putin is pushing every boundary. He's trying to challenge us in every possible way. And to equate Russia with the United States is completely, it makes no sense. Russia's got an economy the size of the state of New York. Russia's got a declining population. The only power that Russia has is that they've got a bunch of nuclear weapons. And for us to somehow say that because they're a great power, we should somehow be on the same page as them, that we should ignore their invasion of Ukraine, we should somehow be nice to them, I think is just makes no sense whatsoever.
But Bill, no one's talking
having a hard time even understanding that.
About being nice to Russia. We're talking about engaging as a way of defending our interest. I don't support.
Well, so what is engaging?
I think the invasion of Ukraine was a mistake, and I think that we need to bring that conflict to an end in a way that is pragmatic, that leads to some sort of enduring settlement, and reduces the risk of conflict between our two sides. We're still going to compete. We're on different sides of a whole range of issues.
Alina, I want to come to you and ask you also to help define what we're talking about. What do you mean by defeat for America? Where's the defeat in what's in
Well,
the direction
actually,
we're taking?
if I may, just on this debate as to what is normalcy, I think it's clear that the Russians don't want normalcy. So we have a tendency in the West, in the United States, to think that our interests are other people's interests, and the world looks to us as we see it. That's not how the world looks to the Russians. The Biden administration tried normal. Stable and predictable was what the Biden administration wanted from Russia. And what did we get? The invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The Obama administration famously tried to reset a broad set of diplomatic engagements. What did we get after the end of the Obama administration? More violence. We got Crimea. So they don't want normal.
Does this add up to defeat?
Right now, I don't think we know what the policy is from the United States. We don't know what the president is going to pursue. I think that is very much in flux. I think we have seen 5 times Democratic and Republican administrations try to do normal with Russia and fail every single time. I don't want this White House to fail. I want them to succeed in containing Russia and pushing back against Russia, because that is the only thing they understand. They only understand strength, and not if we keep giving them what they want, they will just take more and more and more.
All right, that very point is what I want to bring to. Jeffrey, the presumption of your opponent's side is that Putin's and Russia's aspirations are for more and more and more, that's their driving aspiration, their driving ambition.
It's so absurd, and I'm sorry, we don't have time, and we haven't had in our country any proper historical understanding or memory of this. And when Alina says this was out of the blue or Biden was normal, my God. I was advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev. I was an advisor to President Yeltsin. I was an advisor to President Kuchma. I've watched this from the very beginning. The United States went into arrogant overdrive in 1991. And it's easy to forget everything which we're designed to forget. We promised, and it'll be denied, but go look on the George Washington University National Security Archive. We promised extensively and repeatedly not 1 inch eastward of NATO. And it'll be denied, but you go look. I don't care what anyone says, because it's all there in a deep archival record. Then we bombed Serbia for 78 straight days. I happened to be an advisor in Yugoslavia as well. It was a completely reckless policy. We broke that country in 2. In 2002, we unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty over Russia's vociferous objection that we were destabilizing the nuclear framework. In 2003, we invaded Iraq. We invaded Syria in 2011, we bombed Libya, and we overthrew a government in 2014, which I happened to see with my own eyes.
Jeffrey, I have to give your opponents some chance of time, please.
So I think I know what Bill's going to say.
And
Very
Bill,
quickly,
you'll be next. Okay.
I read those archives right before I came for this debate,
Good.
and you're referring to the conversation between Jim Baker and
I'm
Gorbachev.
referring to 3 years of conversations,
That is
not that
there's
day.
the 1 inch conversation is one transcript.
I know, but there's a
You
39
can go back,
documents
you
on
can
that
go
page.
back. I read it. It's not that long. That conversation is what everyone refers to, that supposedly NATO would not be expanded 1 inch. If you want to talk about
say
history,
about that, by
I
the
let
way?
you finish,
He said
sir.
that's
I let you finish.
That's very
I
important.
let you finish.
Jeffrey, please.
Okay.
I know this is a very popular argument, but the truth is, and I think as your partner Tom would know, in diplomatic negotiations, there's all kinds of conversations that happen to try to test out the other side. That agreement, which by the way only was talking about the reunification of Germany and the expansion of NATO to what was East Germany. Anybody can read the archive, please go ahead. That is the historical fact, and that is the historical record. And Jim Baker himself, in an interview later, said that was never an agreement. It was something I said as part of a conversation, but it's a failure of Gorbachev's leadership that he failed to have that enshrined in the final agreement. If we had a final agreement, there'd be something to talk about. But the Soviet leadership at the time failed to defend their own interests, and that was their failure, not ours.
All right, I'm stepping in at this point because while I acknowledge that the history is critical, we have 10 minutes left to debate Trump's current policy towards Russia. Bill Browder, as you know, you have this unproductive relationship with Vladimir Putin. But the President of the United States seems to be interested in a productive relationship, and he has been more friendly towards Vladimir Putin than others. I would say that is part of his policy in terms of the diplomacy of it. What's your assessment of the President's approach to Vladimir Putin?
Well, unfortunately, the president's approach towards Vladimir Putin is as effective as every other president's approach towards Vladimir Putin. And as Alina said, every president has a U.S. president feels himself to be very, exceptional by becoming the American president. And so it started with George Bush. He looked Putin in the eye and said, "I saw his soul." And then he realized a couple meetings later that he didn't, and there wasn't such a good soul there. And then we had, after such a bad relationship, then Obama showed up and he said, "I'm such a special guy. I'm going to be able to sort out Putin." And he did the Russian reset. And of course, that didn't go anywhere. And then after that, we had Donald Trump show up, and he said, "I think Putin is a great guy," and that didn't do anything. And then Biden shows up, and he says, "We want a predictable relationship." And so every one of these guys shows up, thinks they can somehow sweet talk Putin into being a reasonable guy, and we're exactly the same place now as we've always been. Putin is not going to change. The only thing that Putin understands is a boot on the throat, and we should put a boot on his throat instead of kissing his ass.
All right. Thomas?
Look, it's a complicated relationship, and it has been historically. But also, you have to realize that each of those presidents accomplished something in his engagement with Russia before it went sour. We had arms control agreements that were advantageous to the United States. We had assistance in counterterrorism. The administration I worked with in Afghanistan in particular, that was positive for the United States. The Obama administration, arms control agreements, also work on counterterrorism, work on nonproliferation. So there's certain things we got at it. These things turned sour in the end, in part because of a mismatch between American ambitions and Russian ambitions. I think the president today, Trump, is right in wanting to open up a diplomatic conversation with Putin. I think he's right in wanting to bring this conflict in Ukraine to an end. Whether he's pursuing this in the way that is going to lead to that result is something that we can debate. I would do it in a different fashion from the way the president is doing it right now.
Alina?
I don't disagree with that. I think we need to have diplomatic engagement with another nuclear superpower. Yes, we need to keep strategic stability talks alive. We need to have mill-to-mill conversations to avoid any conflicts because we operate in the same theaters. That's critically important to avoid misunderstandings and to inadvertently lead to a conflict that neither side actually wants. So I don't think that's the debate here. The debate is whether or not we are going to cower in front of Vladimir Putin, or if we're going to stand up to him. And again, I think, as Bill has also said over and over again, whenever we try to meet Russia where it is, we understand very quickly that they're not a trusted partner, and they don't actually want to compromise. And it's not in our interest to give them what they currently want, because that would undermine our national security, American national security, to have a Europe that is under constant threat, that is in a constant sphere of instability, which is at the end of the day what the Russians are doing in Ukraine.
Jeffrey, President Putin has indicated many times that he thinks the U.S.'s goal is to eliminate Russia as a great power rival. Is he right?
Yeah, well, it's in all the documents. We've been saying that for 30 years. That's stated goals. As Big said it, Rand extending Russia. How can we annoy and weaken Russia? Wes Mitchell explaining we should get Russia into a good war, explaining that in 2021. Of course.
So where then is the virtue in President Trump's approach?
The virtue is maybe we won't get ourselves blown up, and we won't get my grandchildren blown up. I'm sick of it that I'm sorry, it's really true. We came close to nuclear war already. What are we doing? Normal under Biden was U.S. targeting attack missiles deep inside Russia, actually firing missiles in Russia. That's normal? No, that's insane as far as I'm concerned. What are we doing? This war started because we cannot leave good enough alone. We had to be right on Russia's borders. We had to have missile systems all over Russia's neighborhood, despite every objection for 30 years. None of this is told. All we hear is unprovoked, out of the blue, raping the neighbors. This is nonsense, this trivialization that this is about one person. That's a game. That is a propaganda game. This is not about Putin. This is about U.S. Russia relations. It's about strategic policy. It's about our military. It's about NATO. And we overplayed terribly. And we risked nuclear war. And it's a disaster. And we've got to stop what we're doing. We'll do the same thing in East Asia the way we're going.
All right, I want to let Bill Browder respond to what you just said.
I'm amazed that we somehow are blaming the war on the United States. It's just not true. Vladimir Putin started this war for one simple reason, that he's been in power for 20 years. He's a dictator. He and 1,000 people around him have stolen $1 trillion from the Russian state, $1,000 billion. They now realize that the Russian people are coming for them, and they want to make sure that they don't end up getting hung from a lamppost. And so what does Putin do? He creates a foreign enemy. The foreign enemy is Ukraine, and he starts a war. Instead of having the Russian people mad at Vladimir Putin, they have the Russian people mad at Ukraine. That's what this war is about. And it's just ridiculous. It's insulting. It's just stupid to blame this on the United States. Vladimir Putin started this war to stay in power. It has nothing to do with
Bill,
the United States.
The impact then on seeing President Trump sitting with Zelenskyy in the Oval Office and essentially telling him that he started the war and he's the dictator. What's the impact of that?
The impact is that it's the most sort of Kafkaesque, insulting to everybody's intelligence thing that could ever happen. Zelenskyy is the hero, standing up to a bully, standing up to a criminal, a war criminal, an indicted war criminal. And to have Trump shout at the hero and blame him for the war, that anyone who's got two eyes can see that Putin started, it's insanity. The world that we're living in is insane if anyone believes that.
Does that, Alina, represent, to get to our debate topic, a defeat for America?
I mean, I think a defeat for America would be appeasement of Russia. I don't think that's where we are, to be clear. But yes, that would mean defeat for America because it would undermine everything we invested in the service of European security, which serves our interests because we want to avoid another world war in Europe. That's why we formed NATO. That's why we're investing in Europe. It would also give free rein to other powers, most notably China, to do whatever they want. And think there's no consequences for it. So I think there's an argument that's often made that I'm hearing allusions to now that we don't want to start nuclear war, right? I agree with that. I don't think anybody wants nuclear war. Guess who else doesn't want nuclear war? Putin. And I think this is a real red herring because at the end of the day, the way we get to a track towards World War III and nuclear war is exactly what we've been doing, which is showing a huge amount of restraint in how we manage Russia. NATO didn't expand to Ukraine. Ukrainians didn't want to be part of NATO, actually, until the Russians invaded them. Sweden and Finland didn't want to be part of NATO until the Russians invaded Ukraine. So everything that the Russians have done have only, I think, strengthened the idea that NATO is the critical deterrent. And if we had expanded NATO faster into Ukraine, into other sort of gray zones that the Russians see as their legitimate sphere of influence, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
All right, we're going to go and I'm going to come in just a moment to you for questions. I just want to come to you, Thomas, for a 30-second question. As we're debating Trump's policy towards Russia, is it clear that we know what it is?
Short answer is no, and I'm not sure the president knows what it is at this
Okay,
point.
I'm going to go to questions for the audience now then, right down here, sir. Again, a mic is coming up from behind you, and if you could stand and tell us your name, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you. My name is Stratos Afioleas. I have a question for you, Professor Sachs. I was interested in what you expressed as normal. Is it normal to invade a sovereign country?
It is for the United States. It is normal for the United States to invade another country. We have done it in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and we overthrew the government in Ukraine. So that's normal. It is absolutely inappropriate American foreign policy, and it provokes constant wars. That's our problem. We are absolutely causing wars, and that is what is very hard for us to accept, but it is absolutely the case.
Okay, so you're saying what Russia did is normal because the U.S. has done it?
I didn't say it's normal. I said that there's a history that needs to be understood.
Okay.
This is a completely different thing. There is a history to this.
Richard Sobel, thanks for being here. I have a question for Tom Graham and Alina. Tom, what would you not offer to Russia to make a deal with Ukraine? And Alina, what would you offer? What would you envisage that would be a settlement that would be good for the United States?
Cool question,
and Europe?
actually. Thomas, you're
Good.
first.
Look, I mean, I think the goal of the United States should be the preservation of a sovereign, independent Ukraine that is integrating into the Euro-Atlantic community on as large expanse of the territory of Ukraine within its 1991 borders. That is not something that Putin wants. And if we could get that, that would be a major concession or a major, I think, success for the United States in these negotiations.
Alina.
I agree with Tom.
All right, that's our answer. Front row, please.
Georgette Mossbacker. I actually have a question for Alina and Mr. Browder. What does standing up to Russia look like? I mean, it's not exactly Cuba or Venezuela. We talk a lot about standing up to Russia. Well, what does that look like?
Bill, can you take that first? We haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, well, so it looks like two things. One is that Ukraine needs weapons, both defensive weapons, so they don't get destroyed with overnight attacks on Kiev and other civilians. And they need offensive weapons, so they can destroy Russian military apparatus. At the moment, we're not supplying them with sufficient weapons, and there's always been a point, even in the most bullish support of Ukraine, where we held back the weapons that they needed. And then the second thing we can do, and we should do, is completely strangle Putin financially so he doesn't have the money to fund his war. And what does that mean? That means specifically we cut off the flow of money for his oil. And if we were to do those two things, then Putin would not succeed in this war. He would fail in this war.
Alina, do you
But
want
so far we failed to do those
that?
two things.
Just very briefly, because this is a very important question, because Ambassador Mossbacher is 100% right. Russia is a major country. It's the biggest country in the world, and it has nuclear weapons. So what do we do with that? Bill's earlier reference to a policy of containment. This was a policy that worked well in the Soviet era. We need a new policy of 21st century containment, and I think it has to start with applying more pressure to get the Russians to the negotiating table on Ukraine, first and foremost, from a position of sincerity. And the only way we're going to get there is by economic pressure, military pressure, and political pressure. And that is all about working across the globe with our allies. Bill's points on energy, using the Russian assets that Europe currently has in its possession to repay Ukraine so it can rebuild itself. There's a whole lot of stuff that we can do to stand
Alina,
up to
do you think we
Russia.
should fight until Ukraine is part of NATO?
What's the question?
Do you think that we should hang in there until Ukraine is part of NATO?
Hang
Is
in
that a
there
condition?
until Ukraine
What I
is
mean
part
is
of
that
NATO.
is that a term for the settlement, that we insist that Ukraine have the right to be part of NATO?
I think that is the
Since
question.
that's a major
Frankly,
cause of war, you
this
should
is a
have
good
an answer
question.
for that.
No, I do have an answer for
Okay.
that, and that's a very good question.
Thank
I
you.
think right now we should be talking about what does a ceasefire look like, and what is acceptable to the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, which I think is what this White House is actually trying to do, and that's a good thing. We're pretty far away right now in those positions. The NATO conversation, to my mind, should be left off the table.
What does that mean, off the table?
Once we have an understanding that Ukraine, if it's all of Ukraine, I agree with Tom's earlier point, 1991 borders. If it's Ukrainians agree to something less than that, but whatever Ukraine remains independent, Ukrainian governmental control in a democratic country, then that government, when it's elected after the war is over, can decide. Will
Ukraine
they petition?
decides.
Of course,
Okay,
that is how
yeah.
NATO's open door policy actually works. It's not that NATO forces countries to join it. Countries petition and go through a very extensive process to join NATO. Because why have countries joined NATO? Why has NATO expanded? Because they were terrified of getting invaded by Russia.
Just out of curiosity, if Mexico decides that because of Trump, it wants... I'm asking you a question.
Whataboutism. I'm not going to really
Whataboutism?
No,
How about whataboutism? We're talking about
Mexico?
whataboutism.
What about that? We're
No.
talking about Russia.
No, we're not. We're talking
yes,
about...
we are.
We're talking about...
Talking about
I'm going
Russia.
to,
Wait a minute.
I am going to moderate now. Thomas, the prescription that your opponents have laid out for how we should be responding to Russia, does that represent normalization for you?
The question we should be asking is, what are we trying to achieve? Right? We've got a circumstance now, obviously not the best of all worlds, and we want to bring this to a conclusion. I think the Trump administration is right in wanting to end the carnage. The question is on what terms and how does that provide a foundation for moving towards the type of Europe we would like to see over the long term, the type of Ukraine we would like to see over the long term, and the type of relationship that we would like to have with Russia that provides stability going forward. Part of the problem we have when we talk about this issue is no one can define success and no one can define defeat. We throw those terms around as like it's obvious. What does it mean to succeed in Ukraine? What does it mean to fail in Ukraine? We're not dealing in sort of absolutes at this point. We're going to be somewhere in between, and it's going to be a messy solution. The question is, whether it's satisfactory from the standpoint of the advance of our interest? Is it satisfactory as a foundation for Ukraine to build the type of society it would like to build and integrate it into Europe? That's what we should be focused on. And what we're talking about now is sort of way up here, abstract, and not focused on sort of the pragmatic questions that we have to deal with now and over the next several months.
With that fire hose of nuance, which I appreciate, I am going to call a close to this part of the conversation because we have to go to our closing round. So we're going to move on to our closing round. And in our closing round, each of the debaters will stand up once again and make their closing statement. Jeffrey Sachs is up first. He's been arguing that Trump's policies are a return to normalcy. Jeffrey, the floor is yours to tell us why.
We should not do to Russia what we would not have them do to us. That's all. No, that's all I want to say. We should understand that there is a symmetry that's not whataboutism. That is what is going to get us killed. If we say we have the right to do whatever we want, we can go wherever we want, we can put our military bases wherever we want, we can put our missile systems wherever we want, we can fire our ATACMS wherever we want, but it's whataboutism to ask the question, well, what if they were doing it to us? That is baloney. Sorry. That's enough.
Alina, you're up next. Again, you're arguing that Trump's policies will spell defeat for America.
Well, I will say, we'll see what the policy actually is. I think we have to give the president some leeway here. But I'm going to take out my phone here because I want to quote from a respected historian, John Mearsheimer, for my closing argument, where he wrote, and I quote, "Because great powers are programmed for offense, an appeased state is likely to interpret any power concession by another state as a sign of weakness, as evidence that the appeaser is unwilling to defend the balance of power. The appeased state is then likely to continue pushing for more concessions. Furthermore, the appeased state's capability to gain even more power would be enhanced, probably substantially, by the additional power it was granted by the appeaser. In short, appeasement is likely to make a dangerous rival more, not less dangerous." So I don't agree with Professor Mearsheimer on a lot of things, but I wholeheartedly agree with this. Because I think the bottom line here is that, countries like Russia are cowards under Putin. They will only attack nations that they see as weak, where they can win. Look at Ukraine, look at Syria, look at Georgia before that. These are all places that the Russians knew they could bully. And until we stand up to them, until we take a stance and act like a great power ourselves, this is never going to end. The cycle of resets and aggression, reset, aggression is never going to end. So I hope this administration is wiser than all of the preceding administrations we've seen on both sides and does the right thing.
Thank you. And Thomas Graham, you are up next. Again, you're arguing that the policies we're seeing from the president, to the extent that we understand them and perceive them, are a return to normalcy.
Right. Let me make one broad point. Ambiguity is normal in global affairs. And we are engaged in a conflict that is going to end at some point in a very ambiguous outcome. It's not going to be what we would consider a just outcome by any stretch of the imagination. Ukraine is not going to regain its 1991 borders. President Putin is not going to be hauled off to the Hague to be accountable for whatever war crimes we think he may have committed, nor any other senior Russian leader. But it's still possible to get an outcome in this conflict that provides a foundation for what I've argued for and what I think the administration in its own curious way is trying to achieve. And that is the preservation of a strong, independent, sovereign Ukraine that has an Euro-Atlantic orientation. That would be good for us. It would be good for the Europeans. It would be good for Ukraine. And in a strange way, it would be good for Russia if they understood how to deal with the challenges they're going to face over the long run. We're not going to get there without engagement, and we're not going to get there without certain compromises. If we're going to deal effectively with this conflict, we need to broaden it. We need to think in broader terms of how we're going to structure European security going forward. And if we do that, I think we have the tools and we have a way of reconciling Russia to an outcome that is much less than the maximal demands that Putin has had when he began this conflict, but is going to be somewhat less than what many people had hoped for when Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in 2023.
And Bill Browder, in Denmark, on the screen, you get the last word. You are arguing that the Trump policies are a defeat for America. Here's your last chance, please, to tell your story.
So back in the days before I had all my troubles with Putin, before I was expelled from the country, I was a fund manager. And one night, I think it was around year 2000, I had a client come to visit me in Moscow. I was living there. And he said, why don't you come along to a poker game with some Russian oligarchs? And I was a little bit sort of taken aback by that, but I thought, okay. So I show up at this casino with my client from Europe and these two Russian oligarchs and a couple of their friends, and we started playing poker. And it was the strangest poker game I've ever played in my life, because it didn't matter what hand they were dealt. They would raise and bluff and raise and bluff no matter what. And so I folded the first hand because I didn't have good cards, and I folded the second hand, and I sort of watched this thing play itself out. And then eventually I got a good hand. And I stayed in, and of course they raised and bluffed, and I kept on going along with it, and I won. And the what I learned from this, and it wasn't just these oligarchs, it was all Russians who have power and influence. They raise and bluff and raise and bluff. And that's what Putin is doing right now. Putin has got a pair of twos. The United States has a full house. We should not be folding. We should not be capitulating. We should be standing up firm and letting him fold when he realizes that he's got a bad hand.
All right, that is a wrap on this debate. I want to thank all of you for your questions. I want to, Bill, I want to thank you, and Alina, and Jeffrey and Thomas. We really do try to do what we just saw happen, which was a substantive debate. And I want to really thank the Council on Foreign Relations for giving us this partnership and this audience.